Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Answers from the Lab, where we share Mayo Clinic knowledge and advancements on the state of testing and science from laboratory leaders and the people who are making it happen behind the scenes. I'm Dr. Bobby Pritt, Interim Chair of the Department of Laboratory Medicine and Pathology at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. With me today is Dr. Bill Morice, the President and CEO of Mayo Clinic Laboratories. This is our weekly discussion with Dr. Morice, in which we learn about updates in the field of laboratory medicine and pathology.
Hi, Bill. Welcome back.
Hi, Bobby. Great to see you in this kind of festive time of year as we hit the holiday season.
Yeah, it's wonderful and going into the new year, lots of exciting things going on like always. And one topic I thought we could discuss is there's been a lot of chatter, rightfully so, about bird flu, H5, avian influenza, and the concerns about this potentially turning into something more serious.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you bring it up because I mean, it seems like it continues to reappear, if you will, not to use a bad pun, but in the news. So there's like news cycles where it kind of comes and goes, and now again, there's been more it's been in the news, if you will. So yeah, I'm sure it's on a lot of people's minds. What can you tell
Yeah.
them?
Well, maybe we should start with the bottom line up front. I have some friends in the military, and that's the bluff. So let's start with our bluff. Bottom line up front, don't panic. Uh, but we need to keep an eye on the situation. There are a lot of animals that are infected with avian influenza. It's widely circulating in birds, but also dairy cows and poultry. And we've had a number of human cases now. We're up to 61 confirmed cases. Most of them have
Yeah.
been mild, but with this much virus replication, we have to worry about mutations that could form and potentially having viruses that are increasingly capable of being transmitted from person to person.
Yeah, I mean, when you said wildly, I mean, I suppose wildly, but I think it's important for people to remember. We're hearing a lot about it in domesticated animals, and
Yes.
livestock. But the reality is that the primary pool, I think, is still just wild birds, and so they migrate, move around, and go everywhere.
Well, that's the problem. Yeah, you have these migrating birds and they go all around the world. And that's been the case for a very long time. It's just that we have now all of these infected wild birds. And it's led to an infection of a lot of other types of animals. Dairy cows, so herds of dairy producing cows are a big concern, poultry, but there's a number of different animals, including even house cats, that are infected.
Yeah, wow, that's it. Yeah, I remember you're bringing back a lot of conversations from COVID time, as we now
Hmm.
call it. But I think one of those things to bear in mind is that yes, there's been over 60 confirmed human cases. To your point, those are almost all linked to a known exposure, a high likelihood exposure to an animal
Yep.
that was infected. And the flip side, of course, too, is that you know unless you are specifically looking for this strain of influenza, the most routine tests are not going to, they will be positive, but they won't flag it as this. So it's quite possible that there's been people who have had it and haven't really been very sick or just had the typical influenza. So I think that's the first thing that should come to mind, I think, is that, the testing that we have for influenza works for this particular strain of the flu.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Bill. At least the PCR assays should be good at being able to detect this virus from patients that are infected. So it is true, those 61 confirmed human cases, that's probably just an underestimation. As you said, there's probably a lot of people who just got tested and were told they have influenza and assumed it was the circulating influenza. There's probably other people who never got tested. And, out of those 61 cases, most were farm workers that had mild symptoms, maybe a little conjunctivitis, maybe a little bit of a sore throat. And then they got better in a couple of days and just said, yeah, no, nothing to worry about. So it is circulating, but we do have tests that will at least detect influenza, and we'll call it influenza A. We just need to keep an eye on this. And the CDC and USDA have a number of practices now that they've implemented for testing infected animals, identifying them, and helping to protect humans.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important for people to remember as well. One of the reasons I think that we're hearing continue to hear about this, avian influenza A, as it were, is just because we have so many tools in place now after COVID that help us understand and track these respiratory viruses and understand where they're going and what they're, between genotyping assays, which are really the best way, I think, to identify the strain, which are more widely as part of the public health infrastructure, both within the US and globally as well. And then also, we're still doing things like, wastewater testing in the US, and they've been watching levels of that. And I don't think there's been anything untoward. As the last time I read is that actually most levels are going up, as you would expect for seasonal, respiratory viruses, and actually less COVID than they expected. So to your point, it's not a reason to panic, and it bears watching. But I think the good news is that we can watch. I mean, we have the tools in place, we have testing, we have public health tools, to your point, to really actually stay on top of this. So that's actually, it's more than the silver lining. I think that's actually the good news out of all this.
Yes, and I think we learned a lot during COVID. We now have laboratories that are much more capable of doing genetic sequencing, for example. So we have sequences from patients that are infected, and we have researchers that can do studies and take the strains that are infecting humans and put them into animals to see what would happen, and look at the mutations that are present. So we're well placed to study all of these viruses. Now, you're saying the good news. I will take a step back and say that there are some unknowns still. And there are some potential areas for concern, which is why it's so important for us to continue to monitor. For example, we had our first severe case in the US on December 18th, and it was a patient in Louisiana who had exposure to sick and dead birds in backyard flocks. And I'll point out that the genotype that this individual was infected with is the D1.1 genotype, also seen in wild birds, that is different than the genotype circulating in cows. So because we have all of these additional tools, we can now really examine the different genotypes that are circulating. And it looks like the mutations that occurred could potentially be significant if they were to go and spread out into the community. But thankfully, that didn't happen in this individual. So still some reason to be alert and have some concern, but no need to panic. I'll get back to my bottom line up front at this
Yeah,
point. I
yeah,
think
no,
that, yeah.
and it's, we've been down this path. We know that this can occur. We saw this with COVID. The Omicron strain was so much different than the original strain of COVID, right? So, and it was thought that maybe that happened, again, by being not actually in humans, but because it was so different, maybe it happened in an animal got co-infected with something else, another another coronavirus. So we have to watch. That's why we're watching the animals, because that's where this tends to occur, is my understanding, is, and particularly, I think he said, in pigs. So just continue to watch, because the possibility that this could evolve into something that is more risky for people and can spread from one to the other exists. And that's why we watch. It's not to cause fear. It's just being judicious and to stay on top of things. So to your bottom line up front, no need to panic. Good thing we're paying attention, and good thing that we have the tools to do so, and the diligence as well.
Yeah, and just getting back to a little bit of the basic biology, influenza A, this is what H5N1 is. It's an RNA virus, just like SARS-CoV-2. So every time it replicates, it has the potential to mutate, and it doesn't have a good way to correct those mutations. So that's why the mutations keep occurring, and why we need to keep looking for gradual changes or even larger changes. And as you mentioned, animals, especially pigs, pigs are known as the mixing bowl of influenza viruses because they can be infected with avian strains and human strains. And I have to use the quote from my friend, Dr. Ben Bradley at ARUP. He said, we're one pig away from a dangerous strain. I think it was actually one pig away from a pandemic, although I don't think we're quite there. But, a pig, we have to watch this, the more animals that are infected.
Yep. And no reason to panic if you had a Christmas ham. You will not catch avian influenza from your Christmas ham or anything else. It's just, again,
Right.
it's just the potential that exists for, different animals, and they in particular. So, don't need to be prejudicial against pigs, but it just
Yes, very good point. Or birds for that matter. But stay away from dead birds if you see them in your backyard.
Yeah, that's another good point.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Bill, for the discussion as always, and stay safe and warm over the holiday season. And wishing everyone who's listening here today a really happy 2025.
Yeah, well, same to you. Safe, hope safe travels if you're traveling, and for everyone that listens, hopefully you're safe with people that you want to be with and enjoying the holiday season. So, and then we'll be on into 2025, which is kind of crazy to believe.
Absolutely. All right, another year.
Another
Until
year.
next time, Bill.
See you, Bobby.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Answers from the Lab. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and don't forget to tune in every Thursday and every other Tuesday.